I remember the day Laura and I walked into the company for the first time, side by side, wide-eyed and hungry for success. We were just two ambitious young women, eager to prove ourselves in a world that never seemed to make space for people like us. From the very beginning, we had each other's backs. Through impossible deadlines, ruthless bosses, and long nights fueled by vending machine coffee, we fought our way up, together. It wasn't just friendship, it was survival. A silent pact that no matter what, we'd rise together. Every milestone felt like a shared victory. When I landed my first big project, she was the one who popped open a bottle of cheap champagne in the break room, grinning like it was her own success. When she got a raise, I cheered so loudly that people in the next department turned to stare. We took on the brutal politics of the corporate world like a team, laughing at the absurdity of it all, comforting each other after tough meetings, always believing we'd make it to the top the right way, side by side. I trusted her completely. It never even crossed my mind to doubt her. Laura knew my struggles, my dreams, the weight of the pressure I carried every single day. We whispered about how unfair it all was, how we had to work twice as hard just to get noticed. I thought she understood. I thought she felt the same way. But looking back now, I wonder, when did things start to shift? When did the first cracks begin to form? Was it the way she hesitated before celebrating my wins? The way her smile sometimes faltered when she thought I wasn't looking? I should have seen it. I should have known. But I didn't. I was too busy believing in us, in the friendship we had built over years of struggle. Too busy climbing, never realizing I was standing on a ledge, and Laura was the one loosening my grip. Then, one day, without warning, I fell. It happened so fast, I barely had time to process it. One morning, I walked into the office like any other day, coffee in one hand, a mental to-do list already forming in my head. By noon, I was sitting in HR, blindsided by accusations I couldn't even begin to understand. They used vague words, not a team player, disruptive to the work environment, phrases that sounded rehearsed, detached, like they had been decided long before I entered the room. I tried to argue, to ask for specifics, but their expressions were unreadable. The decision had already been made. I remember the way my hands shook as I packed up my desk, the way my coworkers avoided my eyes. People I had worked with for years suddenly looked through me like I was already gone. No one asked questions. No one spoke up. It was like I had been erased overnight, reduced to a cautionary tale whispered about in hushed tones. And Laura wasn't there. She didn't come to check on me, didn't text, didn't even pretend to be shocked. That should have been my first clue. At first, I told myself it was just a horrible misunderstanding, that there had to be some mistake. Maybe someone in management had it out for me. Maybe there was a clerical error, a misplaced report, something, anything that could explain how my entire career had just crumbled in a single afternoon. But then I saw her. Just days later, standing in the same office I had been thrown out of, shaking hands, smiling like she belonged there. And I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It wasn't bad luck. Laura hadn't just watched me fall. She had been the one to push me. The realization hit me like a slow, sinking weight in my chest. I stood there, just outside the office I had called home for years, staring through the glass doors as Laura laughed with the same executives who had barely looked me in the eye when they fired me. She wasn't just moving on, she was moving up. And suddenly, every moment that hadn't made sense before came rushing back. The times she hesitated before celebrating my successes. The way she always seemed to know just a little more than she should. The forced sympathy in her voice whenever I vented about office politics, as if she was cataloging my complaints, filing them away for later use. I wanted to believe there was some other explanation, that maybe she had fought for me, that she had tried to stop it. But deep down, I already knew the truth. Promotions didn't come out of nowhere. Not like this. And certainly not in a company that moved as slowly as ours. Someone had made sure I was removed. Someone had made sure there was space for her to step in, and the only person close enough to do that was Laura. The betrayal felt like a physical thing, pressing against my ribs, making it hard to breathe. I had trusted her with everything. We had built our careers together, survived the worst parts of corporate life side by side. And now, as I stood there, watching her bask in a success that should have been ours, I realized I had been playing a different game than she had. I had been fighting for both of us. She had only ever been fighting for herself. I turned away, my heart pounding in my ears. I wasn't sure what hurt more, the loss of my job or the loss of the one person I thought would never betray me. But one thing was clear, I wasn't going to let this be the end of my story. At first, I tried to let it go, tried to convince myself that holding on to anger wouldn't change anything, that life had a way of balancing itself out. I told myself to move on, to start fresh. But the whispers wouldn't stop. Former coworkers who once greeted me warmly now barely acknowledged me. A few who did would give me these looks, pity, discomfort, like they knew something I didn't. And then there were the rumors, small fragmented stories that made no sense, about how I had been difficult to work with, how I had sabotaged projects, how apparently I had brought my downfall upon myself. At first, I thought it was just office gossip, the kind that spreads when people don't have the full picture. But the more I listened, the more I realized. It wasn't just speculation. It was a story. A carefully constructed narrative designed to make me look like the villain. And whoever had started it had known exactly what they were doing. It didn't take long to piece together the truth. An old coworker, one of the few who still dared to speak to me, let something slip over coffee one afternoon. A single sentence, thrown out casually, but it was enough to make my stomach twist. Laura said she always knew you'd crack under pressure. I barely heard the rest of the conversation. My mind had already unraveled everything. Laura had been behind it all. The accusations, the vague complaints, the rumors that had spread just fast enough to make sure no one would question them. My hands clenched around my coffee cup as the weight of it all settled in. She hadn't just taken my job, she had erased me, turned me into a cautionary tale so that no one would ever doubt she deserved the position. It wasn't enough for her to step over me. She had to make sure I'd never climb back up. That was the moment I stopped feeling hurt and started feeling something else entirely. The betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Every move Laura had made had been calculated, executed with precision. She had whispered in the right ears, planted doubts exactly where they would fester, and waited for the inevitable fallout. And I had walked straight into her trap, never questioning why the floor beneath me had suddenly started to crack. I had been so focused on doing good work, on proving myself the right way, that I never considered someone else might be playing a different game entirely. I spent days replaying every conversation, every interaction, searching for the moment it had all begun. Had she started planning this months ago? Years? Had every late-night strategy session, every venting session over drinks, been a way for her to study me, to learn my weaknesses? The thought made my stomach churn. I had handed her everything she needed to destroy me, wrapped up in trust and tied with a bow, and she had used it all without hesitation. But the worst part? No one had questioned it. The people I had worked alongside for years, the ones who had seen my dedication firsthand, had accepted her lies without a second thought. It was easier, I supposed, to believe a simple story. Anna was the problem, Laura was the solution, than to look deeper. Easier to go along with it than to ask why. And that was what made my blood boil the most. Not just that Laura had betrayed me, but that she had gotten away with it so effortlessly. Or at least she thought she had. Because now that I knew the truth, I wasn't just going to sit back and let her enjoy the throne she had stolen. No, if she thought she had buried me, she had made one crucial mistake. She forgot that I knew where all the skeletons were buried too. The more I dug, the clearer the picture became. Laura hadn't just lied, she had orchestrated an entire narrative, piece by piece, ensuring my downfall was inevitable. She had fed executives carefully timed complaints, twisting my words, exaggerating frustrations I had shared in confidence. She made me sound unstable, unreliable, like someone who had been cracking under the pressure for months. And worst of all, she had done it slowly, so subtly, that by the time the accusations reached HR, they didn't even feel like accusations. They felt like confirmations. I went through old emails, messages, even team reports. The signs had been there all along. I had just been too blind to see them. Notes from meetings where Laura had subtly contradicted my ideas, playing the concerned colleague who just wanted to make sure everyone was on the same page. Tiny corrections in my reports, forwarded to leadership with an innocent, "Oh, I think Anna might have made a small mistake here." It was a slow, calculated erosion of my credibility, so that when the final blow came, no one would even question it. And I had played my role perfectly. I had trusted her, defended her. Never once suspected that the woman I called my best friend had been sharpening her knives the entire time. The betrayal burned through me, hot and unrelenting, but beneath it, something else began to take shape. A sense of clarity. Laura had played her game well, but she had underestimated me. She thought she had ended me. But she had only given me something far more powerful than a job. She had given me purpose. I closed my laptop, my pulse steady, my mind sharper than it had been in weeks. I wasn't going to waste time being angry. I wasn't going to wallow in the loss. No, Laura had taken everything from me, and now it was time to take something back. Revenge wasn't an impulse. It was a strategy. If I wanted to take Laura down, I couldn't lash out in anger, couldn't let emotions cloud my judgment. She had played the long game, methodical and patient, and now I had to do the same. No one suspected me anymore. I had been erased, dismissed, forgotten, and that was my greatest advantage. Laura thought she had won. She thought I was gone, but she had no idea that I was just getting started. I started with the little things. I reached out to former colleagues under the guise of catching up, carefully steering the conversation toward Laura. People talked more than they realized, especially when they didn't think their words would come back to haunt them. I listened. I took notes. I learned everything about her new role, who she answered to, what projects she handled, where she was vulnerable. She was so busy basking in her stolen success that she never noticed the cracks forming beneath her feet. Then I went deeper. I scoured company records, old emails, any trail of communication that might expose her for what she was. I started collecting receipts, proof of every lie, every manipulated conversation, every instance where she had twisted reality to her advantage. I found reports she had altered, projects she had taken credit for, deals she had nearly botched before blaming someone else. I documented everything, every single thread that, when pulled, would unravel her perfect little empire. But I wasn't just going to expose her. I was going to let her destroy herself. If I played this right, I wouldn't even need to push her off the ledge. I just had to loosen her grip and watch her fall. I knew I couldn't rush it. Laura had built her success on deception, but she had also learned how to cover her tracks. If I wanted this to work, I had to be precise. One wrong move, one careless mistake, and she'd know someone was pulling the strings. No, I needed her to believe everything was fine, that she was untouchable. That way, when the walls finally caved in, she'd have nowhere to run. I started small, planting seeds of doubt. I reached out to key clients she now managed, people I had worked with before, people who trusted me. A casual conversation here, a passing remark there. I hope Laura's handling things well. I know she struggled with details before. A slight hesitation, a raised eyebrow. It was enough. Doubt is a virus. It spreads fast when given the right conditions. And Laura had no idea she was already infected. Then came the mistakes. Laura was competent, sure, but not infallible. I knew where she cut corners, where she relied on half-truths to cover her inexperience. I started making sure those weaknesses were exposed. A delayed report subtly brought to an executive's attention, a quiet nudge toward an error in her numbers. Nothing overt, nothing obvious. Just enough for people to start noticing inconsistencies. To start wondering if maybe, just maybe, Laura wasn't as flawless as she wanted them to believe. And still, I stayed invisible. I wasn't the one pointing fingers. I wasn't the one whispering in boardrooms. I simply let the truth float to the surface, where everyone could see it. And once people started questioning her, once the first cracks formed, I knew it was only a matter of time before the whole foundation crumbled beneath her feet. I could feel the shift happening before Laura even realized it. People who once fawned over her started hesitating before responding to her emails. Executives, the same ones who had eagerly handed her my job, suddenly seemed more distant, more skeptical. The confidence in her voice during meetings wavered ever so slightly, as if she could sense something was off but couldn't quite place what. It was a slow, creeping unease, the same one I had felt when my own downfall began. Only this time, I was the one setting the stage. Then came the first real crack. A high-profile client, one of the biggest accounts under Laura's control, pulled out of a deal last minute. I had nothing to do with it, not directly. All I had done was reach out, subtly reminding them of past mishandlings, of projects Laura had nearly derailed before shifting the blame elsewhere. That was all it took. Companies don't like instability, and Laura, once seen as a rising star, was now starting to look like a liability. Still, I wasn't done. I had the evidence, the receipts, the proof of everything she had done, not just to me, but to others she had stepped on along the way, and I knew exactly how to use it. A single anonymous email to the right person, a neatly compiled document exposing discrepancies in her work, contradictions in her statements, moments where she had manipulated numbers to make herself look better. I didn't need to shout the truth from the rooftops. I just had to place it in front of the right eyes and let it speak for itself. And then I waited, because by now the company didn't need me to take Laura down. They would do it themselves. It started as a whisper, just like it had with me. One executive questioning a report, a client expressing concerns, a colleague who once hung on Laura's every word now hesitating before agreeing with her in meetings. Doubt had taken root, and like a slow-moving poison, it began spreading through the company. I watched from a distance, unseen, unnoticed, as the same machine that had chewed me up and spat me out began turning on her. Then came the moment I had been waiting for. An email, one I had carefully compiled and sent from an anonymous account, landed in the inboxes of senior leadership. Inside were the receipts, manipulated reports, falsified achievements, misleading claims she had made about her experience. It wasn't an attack, it was just the truth, laid out in undeniable clarity. And truth, when exposed in the right way, doesn't need embellishment. It speaks for itself. Laura, of course, had no idea where it came from. I imagined her sitting at her desk when the first response came in, a polite but firm request for clarification. Then another, then another. She had been so confident, so secure in her stolen position, that she hadn't even noticed the ground shifting beneath her feet. But now, the foundation was cracking, and this time, there was no one to catch her when she fell. I wasn't there when she was called into HR, but I didn't need to be. I had lived that moment myself. I knew the sickening weight in the stomach, the cold, sterile room, the unreadable expressions of the people across the table. The difference was, I had been innocent. Laura was not. And no amount of manipulation, no carefully crafted excuse was going to save her now. Laura must have tried to fight it. I could picture her scrambling for explanations, spinning the same kind of lies that had once worked so effortlessly in her favor. Maybe she blamed a misunderstanding. Maybe she tried to shift the blame onto someone else, just as she had done with me. But it didn't matter. The moment doubt creeps into a company like ours, it's like blood in the water. The same people who once praised her, who had helped her rise, were now quietly distancing themselves. No one wants to be tied to a sinking ship. I waited for confirmation. It didn't take long. A whisper in the right circles, a passing comment in an industry forum. A text from a former colleague. Laura's in trouble. It was happening. The same silent takedown she had orchestrated against me was now unfolding against her, piece by piece. And the best part? I didn't even have to push. I had simply pulled back the curtain and let them see who she really was. Then, the final blow. An internal meeting, senior leadership only. I didn't need to be in the room to know how it was going. I could imagine the shift in the air, the careful phrasing, the way the tone changed from concern to quiet condemnation. The company had invested in Laura, trusted her, elevated her, and now she was a liability. The same executives who had believed her so easily before were now questioning everything. That's how the game worked. It wasn't about what was fair, it was about perception. and Laura's was crumbling fast. When she walked out of that meeting, I knew. There was no coming back from this. She had played her game well, but she had forgotten one thing. When you climb on the backs of others, you'd better make sure they stay down, because if they rise again, you become the next step on the way up. It didn't take long for the final unraveling. A quiet, almost casual update in the company's internal system. Laura was no longer listed in her position. No announcement, no grand farewell, just a name wiped clean, replaced by someone else, as if she had never been there at all. That was how these things worked. The same machine that had propelled her forward had now chewed her up and spit her out. And just like that, Laura was nothing more than a cautionary tale. But I needed to see it for myself. Not out of spite. At least, that's what I told myself. But for closure. I made my way to the office lobby, blending into the background like I had so many times before. And then, there she was. Standing near the elevator, clutching a cardboard box filled with the remains of a career she had stolen. Her face was pale, her expression blank. I wondered if she was replaying it all in her head, trying to pinpoint the exact moment everything had started falling apart. The same way I had. For a brief moment, our eyes met, a flicker of recognition, and then something else. Realization. The way her shoulders stiffened, the way her breath caught ever so slightly. It told me everything. She knew. Maybe she couldn't prove it. Maybe she would never be able to say it out loud. But in that instant, she knew exactly what had happened. And she knew exactly who was behind it. I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I simply met her gaze, held it for just a second longer than necessary, then turned and walked away. I had already won. And Laura? She was finally experiencing what it felt like to be discarded, to be nothing, to be exactly what she had tried to make me. Freedom didn't come in the way I expected. I thought revenge would feel like a grand triumph, a moment of undeniable satisfaction. But as I walked away from that office for the last time, there was no rush of adrenaline, no surge of victory, just quiet, a kind of peace I hadn't felt in months. Laura was gone and I was still standing. That was enough. I had spent so long drowning in betrayal, in the weight of what had been taken from me, that I almost forgot what it felt like to look forward instead of back. But now, the past was behind me. The doors that had slammed shut in my face had forced me onto a different path, one that I was finally ready to embrace. I didn't want my old job back. I didn't want to return to a company that had been so quick to cast me aside. I wanted more. So I started over. I took everything I had learned, the skills, the connections, even the scars, and I built something new. A fresh start, free from the politics and power games I had once been caught in, and this time, no one could take it from me. Because I wasn't just rebuilding a career, I was reclaiming my life, on my terms. Then one day the unexpected happened. A message, a familiar name flashing across my screen. Laura. A single line, simple but loaded with weight. Can we talk? I stared at the message for a long time, fingers hovering over the keyboard. A part of me had expected this, though I wasn't sure when or how it would come. What did she want? An apology? A desperate attempt to explain herself? Maybe she thought she could manipulate me one last time, twist the narrative to make herself the victim. Or maybe, just maybe, she had finally realized what she had done. I could have answered. I could have given her the satisfaction of a conversation, let her spill whatever justifications she had been rehearsing in her head. But why? There was nothing she could say that would undo the past. No explanation that would make me forget how easily she had tossed me aside, how effortlessly she had painted me as the villain in my own story. I had already won, not just because I had taken her down, but because I had moved on. Instead, I did the only thing that truly mattered. I deleted the message. No response, no acknowledgement, just silence. Because Laura no longer had a place in my life. She had fought so hard to erase me, to make me disappear. And now, she was the one fading into irrelevance. I closed my laptop, leaned back, and took a slow, steady breath. This wasn't just the end of the story. It was the beginning of something better, something that was entirely mine. And this time, I wasn't sharing my success with anyone who hadn't earned the right to be there. In the weeks that followed, Laura's name faded like a rumor no one cared to remember. I heard whispers here and there, how she struggled to find another job, how no company wanted to take a risk on someone whose reputation had been quietly tainted. Corporate betrayal leaves scars, and hers were now visible for everyone to see. The same people who once welcomed her into boardrooms now avoided her calls. The same executives who once trusted her had moved on without a second thought. She had burned too many bridges, and now she had nowhere left to go. And me? I was done looking back. The weight of what happened was still there, of course. It always would be. But it no longer defined me. I had built something new, something real, away from the games and power struggles that had nearly destroyed me. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't surviving. I was thriving. One afternoon, as I sipped my coffee in my new office, my office, I let myself reflect on everything that had brought me here. The betrayal, the downfall, the long road back up. Laura had taken everything from me once, but in the end, she had given me something too. Clarity, strength, the knowledge that I could lose everything and still rise again. And this time, my success was mine alone. I glanced at my phone one last time, scrolling past Laura's name in my blocked messages list. There was no need to check if she had reached out again. It didn't matter anymore. I smiled, set the phone down, and turned back to my work. My story wasn't about her anymore. It never really had been.